I think I've made you guys wait long enough. What do you think? I see a jack-o'-lantern and two devil horns from Tony Rapino in the chat. So can someone give me the thumbs up if they can hear me? I don't want to go live until I can make sure you guys can hear me. Very good. Welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Devil's Creek launch party. And wow, this it's been a long road to get here, guys. It has been quite a day. So I see a bunch of you in the chat. I have several moderators. Amelia Bennett and Candy Corn Apocalypse, aka Anthony Rapino, are serving as moderators. Also, my wife Erica is also keeping an eye on things for me. And I also have a helper here on my desk. This is Ophelia. She likes to be the center of attention, so I'm sure she'll be popping up from time to time. Greg Chapman is joining us all the way from Australia. Greg is responsible for the painting that graces the cover of the book. And there's Ophelia again. She wanted to make sure you guys could see her fluffy butt. But yeah, so Greg did the painting that's on the cover of Devil's Creek. And there's actually kind of a funny story about this. So my late friend Frank Michaels Arrington sent me a message one night saying that Greg Chapman had posted a painting that was the epitome of Devil's Creek. So I went and checked it out, and holy shit, he was right. So one thing led to another, and here we are. So Greg did the painting. I did some additional design effects on it to darken it up, grunge it up a little bit, and yeah, so really I have Greg to thank for this beautiful cover, and if my friend Frank were with us tonight, I'd be thanking him as well. I'm thanking him anyway. So yeah, this has been a day, guys. I have been awake since about 8:30 this morning. I took the day off from my day job, and because I knew I would be like here at my command center monitoring social media and whatnot, and all the shares and all the reviews that have come in, the shares that have happened. Thank you all very much. You have made this day extremely memorable, and I am grateful for every single one of you who has retweeted, liked, shared on Facebook, shared on Instagram, told your friends, made YouTube videos and reviews and everything. Thank you. This book would not be where it is right now without all of you. So I am eternally grateful. So tonight we are going to do a few things. I'm going to read a couple of scene selections from Devil's Creek, the book. I am also going to take questions from the chat, and I'll also be doing a giveaway toward the end where you'll have an opportunity to win a signed paperback copy of Devil's Creek. So I see a lot of you in the chat here are saying congratulations, and thank you again. I appreciate that very much. Uh, this is always kind of an awkward thing for me, getting on camera and talking to a camera. So, uh, I really just appreciate the fact that you're all here right now. It's been a long road for this book to come out. If you take into account the amount of time I've been thinking about this story, as opposed to just the time I was writing the story, this thing's been in the works since about 2007, technically. I didn't really start writing it in earnest until 2017. First draft took about 10 months, finished in 2018, and now here we are. It's taken about 2 years to get it published, and always a long road with many, many twists and turns. So I've discussed that at length on several podcasts, and also recently with a chat with my friends John Taff and Brian Kirk. You can find all that stuff online. I believe I'll also have my interview that I did with the guys at This Is Horror should be going up sometime soon. I don't know if it's this week or next week. And also be on the lookout for an interview with the Ink Heist guys and gals coming up at the end of this month. And there's also a virtual event for the Beers and Fears virtual book tour thing that's happening not this weekend but next, I believe. I'll be popping in on that to say hello. A lot of great authors on that tour: Armand Rosamilia, Tim Meyer, Frank Edler, Chuck Buda, J.C. Walsh, Summer Cannon. I'm not sure who else is going to be showing up, but yeah, it's going to be a busy rest of the month for me, and trying to make the best of a pretty lousy situation of not being able to go to a lot of public events right now. A lot of conferences have been getting canceled or postponed until next year, so you guys have made it awesome, though, so thank you. Yeah, so looks like we have several viewers right now. So I am going to start reading. This first scene is about 10 pages long, and this was recommended by my wonderful editor, Amelia Bennett. This scene, I guess to kind of set this up a little bit, main character uncovers some secrets about his late grandmother, and he follows up on a clue in her notebook that she leaves behind for him, referencing a retired anthropology professor by the name of Tyler Booth. And in this scene, there's kind of some back and forth between Tyler telling a story and then third person, narrative of what's happening to him, in the past. So this whole scene is about the time that Jack Trembley's grandmother, Imogene, sent Dr. Tyler Booth on an errand to Devil's Creek to retrieve something very special for her. I left here early one Saturday morning in mid-October. College was in the practice of instituting a fall break after midterms, and to be honest, I've been looking forward to it as much as my students. Drafting exams and grading essays is about as exciting as it sounds. Truth is, I've been looking forward to checking out the place your grandmother told me about for weeks. I just didn't have an opportunity to get away until the weekend. Dr. Tyler M. Booth closed the door to his white 1990 sedan and slung the strap of his backpack over his shoulder. He looked up at the sky, noting the late morning sun overhead. Sweat dotted his forehead, and an uncomfortable dampness seeped into his armpits. He'd forgotten what it meant to dress appropriately for such adventures. Although he'd overseen an excavation 2 years earlier, Tyler had not been on a proper expedition since the 70s, when he'd done graduate work excavating several burial sites on the islands off the coast of the Carolinas. That was back before popular films made archaeology sexy and intriguing to the general public, when telling someone, "I'm an anthropology major," resulted in a quick change of subject. These days, Everyone wanted to go into anthropology and its understudies because of Indiana Jones and some video game about raiding tombs. These days, most of his prospective students dropped the class after the first week when they learned how much research and study was involved. "This is a science," he'd reminded his most recent class. "We're studying native cultures with what little they've left behind. We're not looting tombs or digging up buried treasure." Except here he was, on his way to explore an uncharted burial mound and retrieve an artifact for a nice old lady who'd paid him $1,000 in advance for his trouble. The irony wasn't lost on him, and he smiled as he stepped off the gravel road and found the old trail into the woods. The path was covered in places beneath a blanket of fallen foliage, painted orange and yellow and brown from the deciduous canopy overhead. Imogene gave him detailed instructions from memory, but he still had to stop several times to get his bearings due to the overgrowth. The babble of water from a nearby creek led him toward the footbridge. Once there, he paused to strip off his flannel shirt. He tied it around his waist. Birds chattered at one another in the distance as he surveyed the path ahead. The fiery blanket of leaves spread out for as far as he could see, coating the forest floor with vibrant patchwork foliage. Something small, perhaps a chipmunk, skittered through the leaves on the other side of the creek. Overhead, 2 squirrels argued over a cache of walnuts in their nest. Gnats hummed in his ear. Tyler closed his eyes, listening to the language of nature, wondering what stories it might have to tell him. Something horrible happened here years ago, something senseless and terrifying, but he was more interested in the other untold secrets this area had to whisper in his ear. He'd done as much research as time allowed in the weeks leading up to this moment, poring over what articles he could find in the college's limited library catalog, searching for any mention of a Cherokee or a Dina burial mound in this part of the state. All searches yielded nothing. How had no one heard of this burial mound? Furthermore, how had a little old lady from Stafford known about this anthropological anomaly? These were the questions he hoped to answer today. Imogene Tremley wanted him to collect an artifact from the wreckage of her old church, but Tyler Booth hoped to unravel this local mystery which, to his knowledge, had not come up once in regional lore. That was his reward for this little trip, and the $1,000 sitting in his bank account. He fished his canteen from his backpack, took a drink, and continued on his way. When I was a kid, my daddy took me and my mama on a family vacation across the country. We stopped at all those funny roadside attractions. You know the ones I'm talking about. Come see the largest paperclip in the world, shit like that. Well, we stopped at one of these roadside places out west. New Mexico, I think. Or maybe it was Arizona. The attraction was a literal ghost town. One of those single-street towns you see in all those Western movies with Clint Eastwood or John Wayne. This place, Dry Gulch or Gulch Junction or some sort of gulchy town, had been abandoned for decades after a gang of raiders drove through and murdered the folks who lived there. Tour guide was really big on playing up the ghost angle of the place. You know what I mean. He'd say things like, "And sometimes we can still hear them screaming," and other such nonsense. He was trying to scare me, of course, me being a kid and all, except I don't remember being scared. I felt sad. That old town sat dormant since the 1800s, its last living residents slaughtered in cold blood. I mention all of this, Jack, because that's what it was like when I walked through that old shanty town you used to call a home. It was eerie, sure, but I also felt a profound sadness there. Those houses were still standing. No one bothered to tear them down, and it was like walking through a graveyard. Every house was a grave marker. The names weren't etched on their doors, but that didn't matter. I knew what had happened. Doesn't everyone? Even if they don't want to talk about it? But I'll tell you one thing, son. One thing different about that shanty town I didn't feel at the old ghost town out west. What's that? Jack asked. Dr. Booth wiped his lips and shook his head. It felt haunted. As Tyler wandered slowly between the 2 rows of shacks, he was struck with the nagging sensation of eyes upon him. The shacks themselves sat abandoned for 13 years, but the knowledge did not set his mind at ease. He remembered the ghost town of his youth, the way the buildings sagged with age like rotten fruit, their windows and doorways slightly askew, the angles a few degrees wrong somehow, all staring at him, all watching. Stop it, he told himself. There's no one here but you, and you're just scaring yourself. Tyler wasn't the only one to visit. There were signs of others, graffiti mostly. On sides of some of the shacks in faded neon pink paint, Ricky plus Julia forever. Skinnerd! And in one hilarious case, Worship Stan. On the other side of the hut, where the leftover cans of spray paint smudged with pink trails down their sides, the metal marred with spots of rust. A few feet down the path, Tyler spotted a cluster of crushed beer cans in what appeared to be a makeshift fire pit. He'd heard of kids driving out here to have parties. Part of him thought this was a shame that society had slipped a few inches further down the slope into debauchery when even the dead couldn't be honored. Another part of him, however, understood the appeal. The place was isolated, miles from anywhere. There were no neighbors to complain about the noise, and to get there, you had to hike over a mile into the woods. It was the perfect place to have a party. Or to start a cult. Tyler paused near the edge of the empty village and looked back at the 2 rows of run-down shacks. People lived here, he thought. People actually lived here. They bathed in the creek. No running water, no electricity. They chose to live like this. He shook his head. The conviction it would take for someone to forego the amenities of modern life for the sake of their faith was something he admired, and also something that terrified him. He tried to contemplate the sort of power a person would have to possess to influence and manipulate people. Such power was beyond him, but he admired it, respected it, feared it, and for good reason. He knew what had happened here. He knew what Jacob Masters led his congregation to believe, and worse, what he ordered them to do. Humanity had its limits for a reason. We were flawed creatures, truly unworthy of our own success. Power to manipulate people, convince them to sell their belongings and give up their lives in servitude to a God they couldn't see, and then make them take their lives, was the sort of power man wasn't meant to have. Of course, to hear Imogene's daughter speak of Jacob Masters, one might think he was the second coming of Christ. Tyler felt a pang of sadness in his heart, knowing a nice lady like Imogene Tremley had such an insane child. That spike of emotional pain was short-lived. A woman like Imogene wasn't innocent. Wasn't she just as complicit in what happened here? Hadn't she helped build this half-assed Jonestown in the forest outside Stafford? Years later, as he recounted this story to Imogene's grandson, he'd keep this detail to himself, but his gut instinct remained constant over the years. Imogene was partially to blame for what happened here. He felt that in his bones. And later, after he went down in the depths of the barrow, he tried to hold her accountable for what would eventually happen to him, but his heart would have other plans. When I left the canopy of the forest and stepped into the clearing for the first time, I felt something I'd never felt before. There's an energy to the place, like standing near a power station. A low-grade hum you can't hear but feel in your fingers and toes, down to your bones. A slow vibration, almost hypnotic, buzzing through my head like a swarm of bees. Pulsing, breathing in rhythm, and it was whispering to me, Jack. I could hear a voice in the drone. Jack watched the old man get up and make himself another drink. When Tyler sat back down, Jack asked, "What did the voice say?" The professor sipped from his mug, now more rum than coffee, and shook his head. He didn't say anything. At least nothing I could understand. Maybe I misspoke before. It wasn't just a voice, but voices. They were singing in chorus. And for a moment, I thought I could make out what they were singing. Rejoice. Tyler paused at the foot of the hill and cocked his head, listening. The voices were louder here, and they said something he understood, but what was it? Rejoice? He took another step up the overgrown path, winding its way up the hill. The voices abated, but the slow hum permeated the background, drowning out the forest ambiance. Chirping birds ceased, and the insects weren't singing anymore. There were only the voices, an absurd chorus filling his thoughts, like church hymns. You're letting yourself get scared by ghosts, he told himself. He continued along the path up the slope. Calvary Hill was surprisingly larger than he expected it to be, at least twice the size of a typical burial mound in width and height. When he looked up at the summit, he imagined what this place must have looked like when the church still stood. All around him were charred remnants of its presence, pieces of rotted timbers and rusted hinges, fragments of scratched glass embedded in the earth, the half-buried steeple overtaken with weeds. A thick blanket of ash awaited him at the summit. He surveyed the pit, a barren scar on which the church once stood, and from which nothing would ever grow again. Sweat beaded on his forehead and dripped from the tip of his nose. When he turned back to look at his progress, he noted how bald the area was in comparison to the forest. Aside from the grass which blanketed the clearing, no other plants grew there. No weeds or wildflowers. Rejoice. Startled, Tyler spun on his heels and looked across Ashen Patch. The low sing-song chorus hummed in his ear, the voices positioned next to his head. He'd heard them clear as day, but when he turned, there was no one. He was alone here, alone for miles, and an icy nail scraped slowly down his back as a heart-dropping realization occurred to him. No one knew he was here. So stupid, he scolded himself. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck. A feeling in his gut urged him to turn around, leave, go now while you can, because something is wrong here, Tyler. Something is incredibly wrong. And if you don't go now, something incredibly wrong is going to happen to you. Rejoice. He heard the chorus this time, not in his head, but here in the physical world, a chorus of voices singing from within the earth. The voices were sweet, lurid, and they wanted him to follow. Rejoice, for the words are yours. Our ways are yours. Rejoice, our child. Come and see. Tyler Booth took 2 steps toward the center of the ashen pit and felt the ground give way. He had no time to react. The earth collapsed beneath him, and he fell into the dark. You're probably wondering why I was so careless. The truth is, your grandma did warn me about the drop. Hell, I'd even packed rope for the descent. Not that it would have mattered. There was nothing to anchor myself to anyway. Even after all these years, I can't tell you why I wandered to the far edge of the ash pit. I knew there was an opening there, but the voices had an effect on me. Told me to come and see, and I wanted to. I really wanted to. How could something so sweet be so malign? And like sailors to a siren, I went toward them, dumbstruck by what they told me. I stepped on some old charred, rotted timbers and shingling covering the rift, and that's when the world fell away from me. Jack shivered. The old professor's words coaxed a memory to the forefront of his mind, one of descent and cold, of darkness and voices and dim candles spread out along the cavern floor. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Hours, probably, far longer than I'd planned to be there. When I came to, my whole body ached from the impact and my head was pounding. Somehow I'd managed to fall more than 20 feet in a dead drop and not break anything. I remember thinking, so this is how I die, alone, in a dark hole, in the middle of nowhere. But I was wrong. There was light down there in the barrow, and I certainly wasn't alone. Tyler sneezed. his sinuses agitated by the dust and ash in the musty air of the cavern. The pressure in his skull was exquisite, pulsing in time with his heart, hammering against the interior of his forehead and eye sockets. He sat up and cried out in agony. Pain crashed over him in churning waves, and for a time he remained still, counting the rhythm of his heart and taking slow breaths to calm himself. He surveyed his surroundings. A halo of light fell from the ceiling in a bright curtain, banishing the darkness to the outer recesses of the room. The depth of the barrow and its hollow nature confused him. This wasn't a burial mound at all, he realized. This was something else, something that didn't make sense with his understanding of the local native culture. When the old woman told him there was a burial mound in southeastern Kentucky, he expected something of Adena origin, or maybe even Cherokee, but this wasn't anything like the mounds left behind by those tribes. No, this was something he'd never seen before at all. He searched his surroundings for his backpack, wincing at the sharp nails of pain driving into his skull, and felt one of the fabric straps. He pulled the backpack toward him, fumbled in the dark for its contents, and found his flashlight. He clicked on the beam, directed it toward the nearest wall, and gasped. Crude stonework supported the outer layers of earth, their asymmetrical shapes held together by a primitive mortar he'd never seen before. The grout between stones was porous, pockmarked with tiny holes and clefts like coral. A viscous black liquid seeped from the openings, covering the stones in a grimy wet sheen. Tyler's heart climbed into his gullet. Get a grip on yourself, he thought. He turned away from the nearby wall and slowly, painfully, rose to his feet. He was struck with a spell of vertigo when he stood up, but he found his bearings a few seconds later. The room ceased its spinning, but the air, no, the fabric of reality, continued to breathe, swelling in and out before him, and he thought he heard the thrum and drop of a heartbeat reverberating from somewhere in the dark. Tyler dismissed the sound, certain he was hearing his own terrified heart, and steadied the flashlight as he set off to explore. A narrow pillar of earth stood near the center of the room, with stone stairs leading to its summit. To the side of the steps sat a stone altar, a few feet from the shaft of light, its surface covered in soot. The whole floor was covered in dirt and ash, mounds of it in some places, and nearly bare in others, revealing more of the primitive stonework inches beneath his feet. He spotted the buried legs of an old aluminum extension ladder and felt a rush of relief wash over him. At least he'd have a way out of this place, but not yet. He wasn't done here yet. Along the far wall, the stones were covered in strange glyphs, but in the dim light he couldn't make them out. He took a step. Something crunched beneath his sneaker. Confused, Tyler shifted the beam to his feet and stepped back. There were bits of stone in the mound of earth beneath him. He traced the tip of his shoe into the mound, seeking the hardened thing he'd cracked with his weight. There it was, something pale and brittle, something... The air hitched in his throat. Oh, God! The femur was small, belonging to a child of no more than 5 or 6 years. Tyler stared at it for a long time, fixated on the contours of those brittle remains and the implications they posed. What the hell was this place? A primitive abattoir built for the purpose of human sacrifice? His mind raced with questions, seeking answers where there were none. This place defied known record. The cultures that inhabited this area of the world, going back for thousands of years, buried their dead in mounds, sure, but they weren't known to sacrifice their own. And if they hadn't built this place, then who? A soft voice whispered from the shadows beyond the altar. Our prophet is sleeping, child. Would you baptize yourself in the blood of midnight and become an infant in his cosmic womb? Would you seek rebirth in his court of bones, and serve on your knees in a palace of fire? Fear seized him. He pivoted on his heels, searching the room for a person, a shape, anything to explain the voice whispering in his ear. Those weren't his words. The voice in his head was not his conscience. A sickening glow pulsed from beyond the altar, bathing the room in sapphire. The grip of fear slackened, and he found the will to move his feet, stepping carefully through the mounds of ash surrounding the stone altar. There was something buried on the other side of the structure, something emanating a blue light, illuminating the carvings and drawings along the stone walls, illuminating an opening in the wall itself. I don't remember if the doorway was there before. It was also dark. My mind was waging a war between terror and curiosity, and the throbbing in my head made it hard to focus on any one thing for long. All I can tell you is it might have been there before. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Jack nodded, flipping through the pages of his grandmother's notebook. He paused on the old Polaroid photo. He pushed it across the table and averted his eyes. Looking at it for too long made his forehead throb. Dr. Booth glanced at the photo, nodded, and closed the book. He pinched the bridge of his nose and winced. I took that just before I dug out the glowing thing in the dirt. The idol your grandmother wanted. I should have charged her more than $1,000. I should have said no in the first place. The Polaroid flash lit up the cavern, and for a split second he glimpsed the room in totality. A dome framed in old stones, covered in writing carved a millennium before, maybe even longer. He didn't wait for the photo to develop. Instead, he shoved the camera and photo print into his backpack and moved to the other side of the altar. A driving desire to leave this place clung to him, eroding any resolve he had to document as much as he could. Everything was fine until he spotted the open passageway in the wall. In his younger days, even just 5 years before, he might have ventured through the dark doorway, but not now. Staring at the opening, at the way the light retreated from its corridor, he was filled with a terror he'd never experienced before. The sort of terror that makes one's gut drop to their feet, their blood run cold, their mind seize like a corroded engine. It was the kind of terror born from facing the impossible, the unnatural, and knowing what one is seeing simply cannot be. And the opening, whether it was there before or not, filled him with a horrific, leaden sensation in his belly. He knew there was no way the passage could exist. However deep he was inside, the guts of Calvary Hill wasn't deep enough to accommodate such a passage, for its ceiling would break the surface of the earth beyond the hillside. What he saw mere feet away was impossible, and yet there it stood, taunting him, beckoning to him. Would you explore us, child? Would you baptize yourself in the blood of midnight? Would you kneel before a throne of fire? Tyler's head swam as he stuck his hand into the earth and retrieved the glowing object. It was, as Imogene described, a rough stone carving in the shape of a grinning figure. The figure was cold and stung his flesh. He shoved it into his backpack, teetering on the heels of his feet as the world swirled around him. A moment later he steadied himself and gave one final glance toward the impossible doorway. There were stars in the darkness, bright blue stars lining the stone walls of a hallway, stretching into the vast darkness of the cosmos. Because it was the cosmos. A shimmering tapestry of stars and galaxies, the cold, uncaring vacuum of space framed here in this place that should not be. The universe illuminated a grotto at the end of the corridor, with large porous walls climbing into the twilight abyss above. Black ichor seeped from the wounds in the stone, trickling down the sheer rock walls into a lake below. He heard the lazy slapping of waves against an impossible shoreline, pulled forward by an unnatural gravity down here in the earth. And in the brief instance when he glimpsed the Twilight Grotto, Tyler was filled with a maddening epiphany that would haunt him in the years to come. Those aren't stars. Oh my God, they're eyes. As if they'd heard his panicked thought, the stars blinked and twitched erratically, all turning to focus upon this stranger at their threshold. A low groan erupted from beyond the lapping waves. We see you, child. Do not take what does not belong to you. Tears streamed from Tyler's cheeks. He scrambled to the ladder, dragging it up the steps of the earthen pillar, crying out as he banged his shin against one of the metal legs. His heart hammered in his chest as he set the ladder against the opening in the ceiling. It was halfway up before he looked back and immediately wished he hadn't. The passage was gone, replaced by a darkening void spilling over the floor like a rich oil seeping up from the earth. A moment later, the room was coated in darkness. Even the failing sunlight from above cast no glare on the surface. What light fell upon the dark was consumed in a liquid nothingness. Tyler Booth scrambled out of the opening and onto the ashen summit of Calvary Hill. He stumbled as he raced down the slope, rolling to a painful stop at the tree line. Pain shot up through his ankle, but the dull throbbing in his head finally began to abate. Exhausted, the fear draining from him in beads of acrid sweat, Tyler leaned against a nearby tree and sobbed. And that was a scene from chapter 11 of Devil's Creek. So, wow, that was kind of intense, wasn't it? Let's see what's going on in the chat here. Thanks, guys. Let's see. Ryan Marciano bought Devil's Creek thanks to Brian Kirk's recommendation. Thank you, sir. Sorry, Eric. You can watch recording when it's over. He says he missed the beginning. Laurel, I would love to do my own audiobooks, but I don't have a recording space. And if I'm recording audiobooks, I'm not writing new books. So... Phil English is an old friend of mine, also from Australia. I think Phil's on the opposite side of Australia than you are, though, Greg, if you're still here. Yeah, Phil's, or at least he was once upon a time. He was all the way over in Perth on like the ass end of Australia. How do I have the perfect shirt for readings? Well, I tend to actually wear whatever. I've typically got, most of my shirts are kind of like this. Offensive to somebody. I feel like if I'm not offending someone, I'm not living right, so... I guess I do have Australia covered. Ryan asked, do I feel that Devil's Creek is a departure from my other books? If so, in what way? Yes and no. I mean, my monochrome books that I kind of started out with, this is a vast departure. But a lot of my stuff in recent years, I would say this is kind of the logical evolution of what I've been writing, lately anyway. I will say that my next releases, I should say, which are coming out in 2021 throughout the year from Bloodshot Books. The first two are re-releases of my first and second novels, and the third novel will cap off the year, which I'm still not done with. I need to get back to that. uh, yeah, I mean, other than the monochrome books, I would say that, you know, Devil's Creek's kind of in line with my style, tone, content, you know, that sort of thing. So that scene kind of took longer than I expected. I don't know. What do you guys think? Can you do another scene? This one's not nearly as long. It's like 3.5 pages as opposed to 10. So, you know, what do you think? Otherwise, I can open it up for questions. It's already. We've already been going for over half an hour. That's crazy. Time flies. Okay, that's one vote from Amelia for more. More scenes. Okay. All right. So this also requires some setup because this is significantly further along in the story. Like I feel like I have read a lot of good scenes over the last couple of months when doing these live streams, so I want to leave something for you guys to be surprised by. I don't want to read all the good stuff. Although if some of the reviews that have come in over the last few days are any indication, then it's all good stuff, which is always a good feeling. So basically, there is something happening across the town, and the main character's nephew has had to escape his father, because what's happening across the town has happened to his father, and he's in danger, and he's trying to get back to his aunt and his uncles because they're the only family he has to go to at the time. So the nephew, Riley, who's kind of like mid-teens, 15-ish, not quite driving age, had to steal his dad's car. So yeah. Sorry, I'm reading the chat, just trying to keep up with it. Alright, so that's kind of the setup. Now we're going to read a little bit about Riley Tate. Also, I should point out that this scene is pretty gross. So, that's the only warning you're going to get from me. Sorry, not sorry. Since his mother died, Riley turned to his daydreams to cope with the horrors of reality. His growing distaste for Stafford in general, its favoritism toward athletes, the hypocrisy of its people on Sunday mornings, the widening gap between himself and his father. These fantasies saved him from real life so many times, comforting him in the twilight hours when the tears came so easily. In his daydreams, Riley Tate fancied himself an anti-hero, the bad boy with a heart of gold from countless miles of Hollywood celluloid. He was the director of his own private film, and he was also its star. In this particular fantasy, Riley was the kid who used his art to shine a light on Stafford's hypocrisy. He fought back against the bullies who threatened him, kids like Jimmy Cord, adults like his father or Assistant Principal Myers, the whole regime governing Stafford's social classes, and played by his own rules. He never did his homework, failed the daily quizzes, still aced the exams. He always got the upper hand of whatever stood in his way, overcoming insurmountable odds, and despite his underdog status, still won the day. He was lauded for his efforts and rejected the establishment's praise. Riley was a savior and a sinner, a troubled youth and prodigy. And at the end of this private movie, Riley saved the girl. The girl's identity changed over the years, but ever since he'd started high school, Rachel Matthews played the part. She was the heroine in his fantasy film, the plucky foil to his anti-hero, the girl from the other side of the tracks whose love thawed his frozen heart. The beauty of his daydreams was, when the film ended and the credits rolled, he could always start it over, changing whatever he saw fit. Before launching himself out his bedroom window merely an hour ago, the film often featured Riley's midnight ride to Rachel's house by bicycle. But the narrative changed. The film edited to reflect Riley's circumstance. Now, the film took place during the day. The bicycle traded for his father's car. Even as Riley drove into Rachel's neighborhood, a ritzy development known locally as Forest Hills, he was daydreaming about the way this new film would end. He would still show Stauffer the error of its ways, and more importantly, he would still save the girl. But today, Riley discovered no matter how much he changed the narrative in his mind, he would still have to face a harsh truth. Reality is far less appealing, far less friendly, and far, far less forgiving. When he slowed the car in front of Rachel's home, Riley Tate realized he was holding his breath and slowly exhaled. A small mound of twigs and leaves burned on the Matthews front lawn. A plume of gray smoke snaked lazily into the air. Laura Matthews stood naked in the front yard, convulsing with laughter and spewing black bile over her breasts, which jiggled frantically with her erratic movement. She held a Bible in her hands and was tearing out the pages one at a time. He loves me? He loves me not. He loves me? He loves me not. Beside her, Don Matthews was in the process of undressing. He stripped off his khakis and tossed them on the fire. His wife handed him one of the torn pages, which he wrapped around his exposed erection. Masturbating, Don Matthews lifted his chin to the air and shouted, "His will and the old ways are one! Hallelujah! Hallelujah!" Laura shouted, stripping a handful of pages from her oversized Bible and throwing them on the fire. The flames engulfed them in a singular whoosh. God's not here, Riley thought, recalling all the Sundays he'd spent in his father's church, listening to fairy tales written by men long dead. Even if he was, he isn't here now. Maybe he never was. A sudden smack startled him from the hideous ritual happening outside the car. Riley's eyes shot front. His heart sank. Rachel Matthews stood outside the car, her hands on the hood. She smiled, revealing blackened teeth. Something gray wriggled along her upper gum line, seeking the air, and fell from her mouth. It landed with a thick plop on the hood. "You came to save me," she said. "But I've already been saved, Riley. I suffered for salvation, and you can too." "No. God damn it, no!" Rachel walked around the car toward the driver's window. She pressed her face against the glass. Black ooze squelched from her nostril and slithered along the surface. Her eyes glowed with blue light. "It's okay, Riley. I can show you the old ways. And then we can be together. I'll let you kiss me if you want. You can have this body, too. Do you want to fuck me? I can be yours if you'll be his." Any other time, under any other circumstances, Riley would have let his hormones take control. But not today. Not now. The Rachel Matthews he'd adored, crushed on, fantasized about, was no longer here. She'd been stolen from him by whatever dark corruption now roiled inside her. "Is that your boyfriend, honey?" Don Matthews walked to the edge of the lawn, absently jerking himself off with the torn page while black tears dripped from his glowing eyes. He peered through the shattered passenger window. "Does he want to stay for dinner?" No, Dad, it's not like that. Rachel shot Riley a wink. Unless you want it to be. Why not join us? I want to show you the old ways, Riley. Like your father and his father before him. It's your birthright. Rachel's voice changed. Guttural, choked with the black filth inside her and reminiscent of the awful voice speaking from the radio. He put his hand on the glass, his eyes burning with tears. I'm sorry, Rach. His voice rattled like empty tree branches, their leaves dried and fallen and dead. Maybe I shouldn't have kissed you the other night. Maybe it was too soon and I made things awkward. I'm sorry I didn't take things slow. He swallowed back a dry ball of cotton in his throat. But I've lost my friend. I'll miss you. He didn't wait for her to reply. He stepped on the gas and drove until he was out of the neighborhood, back onto the Cumberland Falls Highway, and found a vacant lot near the old Stafford Drive-In. Tears came fast, his chest heaving so hard his abs ached, his lungs filled with fire. First his mother, then his father, and now Rachel. He sucked in his breath, held it, waited for the sobs to pass, and let it all out in a quick rush of air. Alone, he thought. I'm all alone now except for the phone. God, how could he have been so stupid? He was so caught up in getting away from his dad and finding Rachel that he'd forgotten about Stephanie. He pulled the phone from his pocket. The battery symbol flashed red, less than 5% left. He'd had a missed call, and he remembered the vibration in his pocket while driving through his neighborhood. So stupid. He listened to Stephanie's message and nodded. Jack's house. Old Lady Trembley's place. The Stafford witch. His great aunt. Everyone knew where she lived. And if he drove around the Stafford bypass circling the city, he could be there soon. Minutes later, Riley was back on the road, determined to find an ending for the movie playing in his head. So that's a little bit about Riley. He's one of my favorite characters. I see the chat has gone quiet, except for Tony, who said, uh-oh. So, yeah, I probably killed it, didn't it? Couldn't help myself. I had to. Yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes too, Tony. That's I love the nonchalant conversation that's happening. So that's all I'm gonna read tonight, but I am gonna take questions now. I think I already answered one of them. Oh, come on, Michael Clark. It's always, I mean, he says it's hard to comment on the winking, and I don't know if that's a pun or not. I mean, it is, but I guess it wasn't intended. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. So, any questions from the audience? Don't make this awkward for me. Oh, I know you're kidding. It's all good, dude. Will the area of Devil's Creek influence or appear in future work? Asked by Amanda Headley. Yes. There's actually some work that already kind of ties in with what I'm calling unofficially the Stafford Sandbox. It's like I've got different stories that kind of all take place in the same area, different time. They have different time periods. So my novella, The Final Reconciliation, involves the fate of a band called the Yellow Kings. Yeah, it's a Yellow King mythos story, if those of you are familiar with Robert Chambers. But it's also just a cosmic horror story in general. And Stafford, Kentucky, the fictional Stafford, is where the members of the band are from. Now, the story that is in Midnight in the Graveyard, which is the anthology that Silver Shamrock Publishing put out, my story in that is called Holes in the Fabric, which ties the final reconciliation into Devil's Creek, because at the very beginning of Devil's Creek, this really isn't a spoiler, the cult, church burns down. So the story of Holes in the Fabric involves the mother of the guitarist for the Yellow Kings, and why she volunteered to help with the cleanup of all the bodies in the aftermath of the mass suicide and church burning. And it kind of explains why she is the way she is when she's referenced in the final reconciliation, and also later she has a tiny cameo in Devil's Creek. So it's kind of, they're adjacent, they're all kind of like these people in this world, and they're connected in some way. My novella Scanlines, which came out through Dim Shores earlier this year, is also a Stafford story. The town that the kids live in the 90s is Stafford, although part of it takes place in the neighboring town of Bryersburg, I think. So once I complete the Monochrome trilogy and all those books are released, the next novel I plan on working on is going to also take place in that universe, although it's going to be more focused on Eastern Kentucky, coal country, moonshining, history moonshining, that sort of thing. It's kind of partially going to be what I'd call a road novel, where you've got main character is on a traveling a great distance to complete some sort of goal, and it's going to start in Michigan and end up in Eastern Kentucky, deep in the wilderness. If any of you have seen Hellier, the series on Amazon Prime, that's the area I'm kind of looking at. Very very impoverished, very just depressed area of the world, I think. No, Laurel, Yellow Kings, they were not a real band. They're a play on The King in Yellow, which was a collection of stories, and also a fictional play in that collection of stories by Robert W. Chambers, which was an influence on Lovecraft, and Lovecraft also co-opted the mysterious figure of the King in Yellow for his own, mythos later on. Yeah. Okay. I'm far ahead in the chat, I think. Let me back up a second so I can address some another question. So Ryan asked about authors that I like, specifically authors who write great lines. Man, I've got a laundry list of authors that I like, and not all of them write horror. So first one to come to mind is Haruki Murakami, Japanese author. A lot of his longer work was a big influence on me when I was younger, like right out of college. Very, very weird, magical realism sort of thing going on there. Like the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, my personal favorite, but I liked Kafka on the Shore, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, which is a bizarre book, and I love it. And also, the classic, I guess, classic, but also obligatory. Stephen King, of course. I think Stephen King's a great writer when he can rein himself in. I think his short fiction is better than his long fiction, personally. Clive Barker, I Clive Barker was a big influence on me when I was starting out, simply because that guy can make the most gruesome things sound so beautiful. That guy's got a way, it's poetic, even when he's writing about really disgusting stuff. Um, I used to be a fan of Neil Gaiman, not so much anymore, not with his recent stuff. I still like American Gods. I liked Neverwhere, and his first collection, Smoke and Mirrors, was pretty good. I haven't really enjoyed much of his stuff since then, though. And of course, the work of Lovecraft has been an influence. I can't say I like the man's writing. I like more just his imagination. As a person, I think he was a despicable human being, but I respect the imagination he had and what he did for just weird fiction in general. Definitely ahead of his time, I think, in those terms. Chambers, of course. The King in Yellow is a big influence when I kind of rediscovered it several years ago. That's what led to the final reconciliation. Yeah. Yeah, Craig, I guess you're right. Those definitely all can those influences definitely come through the story. Let's see. Greg also asked that this is set in my old hometown. Yes. Stafford is a fictional name for a real place. The real place is Corbin, Kentucky, southeastern region of Kentucky, about half an hour from the Tennessee border, right on Interstate 75. Laurel Hightower doesn't live that far away, maybe about an hour. She's in the Lexington area where I went to school. So very early on in the writing, I had planned on just calling it what it is, Corbin. But the problem I ran into is that there were certain aspects of the story where I needed to change the geography. I needed to put a place that, or a landmark, or a hill or something that it isn't really there. So I chose to change the name. That way it would give me a little bit more artistic freedom. I could also change the name of some businesses and not get sued. Yeah, like the description of where Jack's grandmother's house is. It's a very ornate Victorian style home that sticks out like a sore thumb in this area of the world. And the reasoning for that is all explained in the book, but it's kind of described as like sitting on this hilltop, kind of overlooking this whole development and stuff. It's kind of been built up around it, and that hill doesn't exist. The neighborhood does. The hill does not. Where the hill is in the book, in real life, it's actually just a field. So, but it is very close to right off Standard Avenue, where my great grandmother lived, and that's who Imogene is based on. If you've read my story, Saving Granny from the Devil, and my collection of Ugly Little Things, that's pretty much Imogene. She was definitely modeled around my great grandmother who helped raise me. She's kind of been an important figure in my life, and also just lately it seems important figure in my fiction as well. So that's Corbin. I mean, Stafford is, for the most part, I would say 90% accurate. When I was writing the early chapters, and I don't get back down south very often to visit my hometown, because why would I? There's nothing for me there, really. Also, that town didn't really treat me very well. You'll understand that when you guys finish the book. Yeah, I mean, I went through Google Maps and I kind of relied on Street View to kind of refamiliarize myself with the landscape and the layout and the streets to see what's changed. And there was a period of time where I think chapter 5 is where Jack's kind of driving through town, for the first time in like 20 years. And yeah, I know, Kenlin, I'm not really missing anything. Um, so all of that, I had Google Street View open in a separate window while I was writing that. And here's a little piece of useless trivia for you guys that no one has really asked about, so I'll just volunteer it here. And this is going to prove how much of a nerd I am. So the name Stauffered, where did that come from? uh, I was on my way home from work one evening, and I had just discovered that the soundtrack to the PC game The Seventh Guest from the early 90s was on Spotify. And one of the songs came on, which is called Mr. Death. And I think that's the song that kind of starts the beginning of the sequel, The 11th Hour. The villain in those games is Henry Stauff, or Stauff, which is a play on Faust, because he makes a deal with the devil. So, Stauffered. That's how Stauffered happened. It was just a light bulb went off, and it withstood the test of time. I didn't hate it. I kept using it, and nothing better ever came to mind. And Phil English said that I don't need to prove how much of a nerd I am. That we know, and I can't argue with that. So thanks, Phil. Anthony Rutherford says his family's from Corbin. No shit. Small world. And I'm sorry. uh, let's see. Oh God. The question has been asked, how many people knew Todd in high school? Well, while Kenlin is polling the audience, Michael Clark asks, how long has it been since you typed your last word of Devil's Creek? And what has been happening since besides arcs and gathering blurbs? Since I typed the last word, I mean, if we're counting like drafts and stuff, I would have to say, I guess it was December of 2019. I mean, if you're going from that, yeah, because we finally finished the edits and everything. The whole book was done end of 2019, so we could get it out for reviews and start, sending it out for trade reviews, which unfortunately never happened, it seems like. So, yeah, I guess it's been that long. I guess it's been about 6 months, give or take. What's been happening since? I mean, if you're talking about what I've been working on since, that would be the final book of the Monochrome trilogy. I'm about 60,000 words into that currently, and hoping only another 10 or 15 away from finishing it once and for all. Ryan asks, how different of a writer do you feel now than after your first novel, and why do you think that is? Extremely different. Gotta think, my first novel that was released, granted I self-published it back in 2007 technically, it's a Life Transparent, and I've grown leaps and bounds, not just as a writer but just as a person. Like, I was 24 years old when that book came out. I'm 37 now. So I was still a kid. My brain hadn't even finished fully developing. Um, so, an immensely different writer. Uh, I've learned through trial and error how to better tell a story. Because in the past, I tend to would just kind of ramble on and find my way through it and not really have a clue where I was going. And now I kind of have a firm process in mind where I know where I'm going, at least where I intend to end up. Figuring out how to get there is more the fun of it all. I would say a lot of it just came from just continuing to write. I mean, it's writing's a muscle. I mean, you got to keep working it and get stronger and stronger. And of course, the other side of that is you got to keep reading, because reading informs the writing. But just keeping at it and not giving up and not taking no for an answer. And also just in terms of being, along with being older, I also have more experience in the publishing world, having a better understanding of how it works, understanding the process, to go through the edits are a necessity. When I was younger, I didn't think I needed to be edited, which is the rookie mistake for every amateur writer out there. Everybody needs to be edited. Not everybody gets edited. But everyone needs to be edited to an extent. Even Devil's Creek, for as massive of a book as it is, it was edited down 30,000 words. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question, Ryan. I know that kind of rambles a bit. What is my favorite book that I've written? Come on, what a loaded question. That's like, obviously, I'm going to say Devil's Creek, which is available now on Amazon. You can go buy this. It's the best thing I've ever written. And that's going to change when the next book comes out. So, it's, in all honesty, I do have to say it's a toss-up between Devil's Creek and Scanlines. Scanlines, I think, it only had a very limited release. It was like 150 copies total through Dim Shores, which was, I knew that going in. I mean, I never in a million years thought I would actually get selected for that, because they only took 2 books for their open call, and mine was one of them. I think Scanlines, I put that up there with Devil's Creek, and it's only a fraction of the length, but I think it's a powerful story. It's a very affecting story. In the same way that Devil's Creek, I think, is a powerful story and affecting story. If you kind of dig down into the marrow of what the book's actually about, I think I hope it's affecting. I hope it's people find it to be powerful. Yeah, I would have to say it's a toss-up currently between Devil's Creek and Scanlines. So, if there are no more questions, we can actually get started with the giveaway portion of the evening, if you guys are into that. Huh? Two more questions. Okay, 2 more questions, and then we're going to do the giveaway, because it's already 9 o'clock. So, Ryan asked, what external factors do you allow to seep into your writing as far as pop culture? For instance, do you avoid political references or add references to pop culture other than lits? Music. I put a lot of music into my work. Devil's Creek. The whole reason there is a character who is a kind of like a shock jock, you know, DJ with her own radio station is because I didn't have there was no rock station in Corbin when I was growing up, so I thought it would be cool to have somebody who kind of is there to say, you know, fuck you to the establishment and shake things up with, you know, the Devil's music. And I put that in there partially kind of like as an homage to The Fog with Stevie Wayne in that movie, but also because I wanted a means of kind of working in references to some music that I was listening to. I suppose it would be a good time to mention that the radio station Z105.1 The Goat, featuring Stevie G in the mornings, there is a playlist on Spotify. You can listen to the same playlist that I listened to when I was writing the book. It's about 8 hours long. Because there was a lot of music that I listened to over the months to get into the mood and get into the right frame of mind for writing the book. So music definitely seeps into my writing. I'm not really worried about political references. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that what's going on right now in the world probably won't find its way into something that I write in the future. Because it most definitely will. I don't see how it wouldn't, because it's kind of affecting everyone right now. But you know, I know Amelia tries to limit, when it comes to editing, she tries to limit stuff that would date the work. Like if I reference a specific type of phone, or like if I were to go and say that this character's holding like a Nokia cell phone that looks the size of a brick, then obviously that's not going to be current. Nobody's going to recognize that, you know, if it's published in 10 years. So little things like that I try to limit, because I'd like to keep it somewhat timely, but that's true. The first iteration of A Life Transparent, there were no cell phones, because I didn't have one. So I mean, there you go. That's a perfect example. Yeah, I wrote the first draft of that book with only having a landline phone in my apartment. Didn't have a cell phone, so it never crossed my mind. And going back to the other question, Ryan, I guess that's another way I've kind of grown as a writer, is that I'm more cognizant of stuff like that. Desert Heathen asks, what motivates me to tell stories? I couldn't tell you. It's just something that I've always had since I was a kid. And if you think about it, I think it's something that's kind of hardwired into all of us, really. I mean, if you've ever worked in an office environment, you know, there's the stereotypical meeting around the water cooler where somebody's talking about something that happened to them or during their weekend, or something that's happening to someone, or they're gossiping about somebody else, but everybody's always telling someone else a story in some form or fashion. And I think that goes all the way back to you know, when we were living in caves and drawing pictures on the wall to talk about the scary things that are beyond the scope of the fire around which we were all sitting. So, you know, I think that drive is in all of us, really. I guess some of us just need, you know, have more desire to share it than others, maybe. I don't know. That's a good question, though. Lovecraft Ezine just showed up with an ellipses. So I don't know how to interpret that, if that's just his way of letting me know that he's here, or that he disagrees with what I'm saying. I don't know. That seems somewhat ominous, which is exactly what I would expect from the Lovecraft Ezine. Thanks for showing up, by the way. Alright, so we're going to do the giveaway now. Here's what you got to do. You guys just need to type a hashtag that I'm going to give you in just a moment into the chat, and my lovely wife Erica is going to select one at random. That person who wins that book, who wins the drawing, is going to get a signed paperback of Devil's Creek that will be going out in the mail in the next few weeks. I do not have copies on hand. That's why we've been taking pre-orders for signed copies on my site, because I really am horrible at trying to estimate how, demand and stuff. So I figured I'd let you guys just send me money so that I could then just order the books. So yeah, the winner gets a signed copy, and then we'll call it a night. And Lovecraft Ezine was not disagreeing with me. Awesome. Very nice. So I'm going to put the hashtag on screen. Type that into the chat. I'll give you guys about 5 minutes, and then we're going to we'll do a drawing. Oh, this is great. I gotta say, this warms my cold dead heart to see all you guys saying "Hail Satan." Hey, Eric, man, I don't get to set the rates, dude. Yeah, hail Stan, worship Stan. Yeah, I had earlier today a guy from Belgium contact me about the shipping rates, and could I please try to give him a quote from a different carrier? And I'm like, those are the cheapest rates I can give you, man. Shipping something overseas that's trackable and insurable is expensive as hell, even through the postal service, U.S. Postal Service. So, yeah, you totally sold your soul for a book. Me, I sold my soul to write a book. There's a difference. Yep, $30 to Australia for shipping. It's ridiculous to ship overseas, which is why I am going to be offering signed book plates in the near future. Let me see if I can get this on here to show you guys. Just bear with me a second. I just finished these up this evening before the show started. So, the book plates for international buyers, and I don't know exactly how much these are going to cost to mail. I think they're basically going to be a 4x6 postcard that's going to go in an envelope, and I'm going to drop that in the mail and hope for the best. I'm thinking like $5, but it depends on how much it actually cost me to ship those out. So we shall see. But for now, this is what the book plate will look like. Let me just resize this here. So that's the book plate. Oh, thanks, Greg. So that is a old photo, very old photo from like the 1920s of my hometown, Corbin. I did some Photoshop trickery to make it look like it's drawn or sketched, just like the frame. So that's what the international book plate is going to look like. Of course, as I see that some folks in the chat are also saying that it's a must-have for the collection. Thanks, Kenlin. So anybody will be able to buy these, but they're specifically for international customers who don't want to pay to have a paperback book shipped overseas. So that's what that looks like. Has it been 5 minutes? Erica, has it been 5 minutes? I hope she's awake and hasn't fallen asleep. The best part about this hashtag is that anybody who's just tuning in now will have absolutely no idea what the hell is going on. Okay, Erica, do the honors. Pick a winner. I should have queued up the Jeopardy music. While she's doing that, I think I saw another question come through. It was Ryan, maybe. Favorite 3 bands? Oh shit! Laurel Hightower Wells is the winner of the giveaway. Laurel, awesome. So congrats, Laurel. If you guys aren't aware, Laurel is also an author. Fantastic one. Her novel Whispers in the Dark is out through Journalstone. I just read the first chapter of it a couple of nights ago. So far, so good. Believe the hype. She's a great writer. So that's about it. And well, I got one more question to answer. Favorite 3 bands, Ryan. That's very difficult for me to choose. So I'm just gonna ramble off the top 3, the 3 that first pop into my head: 9 Inch Nails, Tool, and Opeth. There you go. I hope I still have, street cred or whatever they're calling it these days. So, guys, thank you so much again for tuning in and listening to me read some really gross shit. And thanks for participating. Thank you for all the support today and leading up to this and everything that comes after. Today's been a whirlwind, and it's going to take me a while to process all of this, but I think this has been a success, and you guys are part of the reason for that, so thank you. Yeah, so again, the novel is Devil's Creek. Let me get rid of that Hell Satan. Novel's Devil's Creek. It's out today from Silver Shamrock Publishing in paperback and Kindle. There is also a limited edition hardcover coming out in the very near future from Thunderstorm Books. These are extremely limited. 52 copies. They're signed. Signature. I sent out the signature sheets several weeks ago. if you're familiar with Thunderstorm Books, you know that their books go very fast because their quality is amazing. So look for that. Pay attention to the social media feeds for Thunderstorm. Keep an eye on that because I do not have a release date for that yet. And that's about it. So good night, everybody. Sylvia Coagula.